25. Supper that first night had indeed been delicious, and they have the distinct feeling that perhaps a little bit of their best provisions had been given to them, once word got around who they were and what they had gone through. Apparently, word of their exploits had started to spread behind the scenes. As such, the pair were taken in kindly by the forces of the resistance, given plenty of time to rest, eat, and overall recuperate. They were given space, and anything they needed. They were too antsy to really rest, though, and so a lot of the time was spent talking with the commander, as well as the other resistance base members, trying to get a broader feel for how the war was going. Being around others, real food, and allowed to rest somewhere she didn't feel like she had to watch her back had done wonders for Midia's mood. As for Chesney, he couldn't quite let go of it all quite so easily, but that was hardly surprising. Still, he was much better at putting it aside and focusing on the now than he had been at Journey's beginning. During a late lunch a few short days after they arrived, Chesney and Midia reconnected to talk about the things they had learned. This time lunch was basic rations, but somehow each of them had been slipped a bit of dessert as well. It felt so odd to be reminded that they were still children, mired in the deadly work that they were in. Maybe showing up at the food line in comfortable pajamas hadn't hurt either. Midia started off the conversation with an enthusiastic expression.
"Did you know that Fiery is here? I was just talking to her."
He struggled to recall the woman, as he hadn't spent a lot of time in Grunt's hideout, but dimly recalled that the yellow-green-haired Doru woman had been the one to volunteer to watch over Midia in his absence.
"Oh yeah, I kinda remember her. She was watching over you, right? What's her deal? Why is she here?"
When she replied, it was with a voice that reminded him of a professor over-enthusiastically drumming their students about their own favorite subject.
"Well, what with Noe Grant's construction, lots of the resistance cells have apparently been collaborating. They all know that this is the big one. While we were together at Grunt's base, she and I got to talking a lot, and since she trusted me, she told me she was here on some big secret mission."
Chesney raised his eyebrows, while breaking off a chunk from the food loaf he had in front of him. It wasn't amazing fare by any means, but he was keen-eyed enough to see that the ones they'd gotten were much fresher looking than others had gotten.
"Well, that's pretty cool. Did you two talk a lot back then?"
She nodded.
"Yeah, she of course watched over me, and stuff, but we also talked a lot about ourselves. Apparently, her older brother and her had joined the resistance right at the same time. Well, at one point, Zagos himself had shown up with his shock troops and just annihilated them. Her brother forced her to hide, and I guess from where she was she could see everything, but couldn't make a sound. She was the only survivor." "That's awful, but it certainly jives with what I've heard about him from these guys. On top of being a technological genius, he's also a terrifyingly powerful spiritualist. I know we've heard that before, but when they told me about all the different groups sent to assassinate him, all having failed, it hits a little differently." "What kinds of groups did they send?" "Big groups, trying to win through sheer numbers. Small, specialized and highly trained squads. Ambushes. Spies. They've tried it all." "Well,"
Midia said, with confidence,
"like you said not too long ago, they didn't have us."
Her confidence was both reassuring and heavy. It was one thing to know your mission was near impossible. It was another to know just how many others had tried and failed before you. But, after their earlier conversation, and her sincere belief in him, he tried to squash down the part of him that was bogged down with duty and worry, and smirk and nod along.
"Damn right, well said."
Just then, he was reminded of one particular piece of news had greatly struck at Chesney when he'd learned it, and it was evident on his face. Midia, of course, was quick to notice.
"Hey, you look like you just swallowed a rock. What's wrong?"
He sighed, and put his fork down.
"I didn't want to mention it, but I got some news about Nasquat."
Her exuberance faltered more into sympathy and concern.
"I take it the news wasn't great."
He didn't miss noticing her squeeze her fork in a tight grip. He could easily guess her concerns.
"After we left Nasquat, things took a turn for the worse. Really strong creatures started showing up, the weather started changing, and K-Mat made more appearances. Everyone is panicking, and everything is crazy.
Medea found the news hard to swallow. She was torn in two directions. Worry for Chesney, and worry for Retzert. She knew that this was exactly the kind of news that would get to Chesney the most, and he would be blaming himself for it, regardless of how much it wasn't really his fault. But more than anything, she just felt such a surge of fear for her father, and her whole hometown of Retzert that was like her family. She couldn't stop herself from asking.
And what of Retzert? Did they say?
He looked at her dejectedly.
No, I'm sorry. I asked, of course, but they didn't know. No news about Raoul either.
Medea berated herself for completely forgetting that Chesney had family in Nasquat too, and hadn't seen his home in over a year.
And, are you okay?
He shrugged.
It is what it is. I can't do anything about it right now. I don't want to worry about it.
Suddenly, a new voice.
Well now, pity party. Table for two. Mind if I join?
It was Fiery, standing by their table with a tray of her own. Chesney was reminded that he still didn't 100% know what she was, since she had the long ears of a Doru, and the polished green forehead plating he normally associated with Fee or Lay. Yet, Lubat were so exceedingly rare here in Sasquatch that he just couldn't shake the feeling that forehead plates were possibly more of a Sasquatch trait in general. Chesney, not wanting to dwell on things right now, chuckled and looked conspiratorially at his partner.
I don't know. Medea, do you think she's good enough to sit at the cool kids' table?
She made a show of thinking.
I don't know. Really, what have you done for us lately?
Fiery barked a laugh.
Oh my goodness, Fiery, being hassled by a couple of kids. How far you have fallen. Well, I brought cookies, so does that get me a seat?
They nodded enthusiastically, and moved over.
Okay. New favorite person?
Chesney said.
Definitely.
Medea agreed. Fiery sat down beside Medea, and handed them both 2 cookies each.
Alright. Still a cool kid. Good to know. Ah, and I see they gave you the new stuff. Aren't you two the little darlings of the resistance these days? Oh, don't act like you didn't have a part in that, Fiery. News can only spread so fast,
Medea said, looking at her knowingly. Fiery shoveled some food in her mouth and gave a, who knows, shrug.
So,
Chesney started.
I hear you've got your own special mission you're going on?
She nodded.
Yeah, but I can't talk about it. Don't feel left out, though. I know they're working on a plan to get you into Zagos' temple. Just like that. Well, that's refreshing. Seems like everywhere we go, we've had to do everyone favors before they'd help us. Yeah, well, there's just no time left for pissing around. I think they just wanted to wait for you two to recover a bit before bringing you in on the plan.
She kept eating while she was talking, and gesturing with her fork between bites.
Speaking of which, what I really wanted to come over here for was to tell you something you would probably be keenly interested to know before things got too busy. Just outside the South Cave exit, there's a valley we use to do training. But there's also a spiritualist temple there too, with a spirit I know you two don't have.
Medea, doing a bit of quick thinking in her head, slammed her hands down on the table and shot up.
Wait, there's a spirit temple for water here. You got it, kiddo.
Medea was practically vibrating with excitement. She started shoveling the meal loaf into her mouth.
Chesney, finish eating already. We gotta go,
she said, though with a full mouth it was actually rather garbled. He laughed, and tried to keep pace.
Fine, but don't choke.
Fiery pulled her tray away a few inches.
Geez, I'm likely to lose a finger around you two. Well, savor those cookies at least.
The trio soon parted, and went off to their own responsibilities. Fiery, to her mission, and the children to go and get the last spirit left on Lennis. While walking to the exit, and nibbling on cookies. Chesney offered a hand to Medea, who took it and intertwined her fingers with his. She savored the connection and let out a weary sigh.
This is all so nice. I almost feel spoiled. What do you mean? Just that this resistance base is giving us real help. What would our journey have been like if we'd had this kind of help from the start? Yeah, I see your point. Like, what if we didn't have to solve so many problems along the way to get here? The perp birds, the town of Hagudo, the uprising in Jurain, the long trek to find Daphne. What if we'd just gotten to Daphne and she's had the equipment waiting for us? Exactly. We've had to fight so hard, and take so many detours, and look how long it's all taken to get here. Now instead of just one world-ending threat, we've got two at the same time.
They passed out of the cave mouth and stepped into a small valley surrounded on all sides by mountains. It was extremely secluded. There was absolutely no way to reach the valley other than by the cave, which made it an ideal place to train. And it was small enough to traverse in almost no time. And nestled just into a mountainside at the north end was a spiritualist temple.
That's true, but you're forgetting something important.
At her questioning glance, he continued.
I get the feeling even if Daphne could have gathered them, she wouldn't have. I even think she deliberately left us a long, arduous path to find her in the first place. What? Why would she do that? Strength. If we had been able to go from Ratzurk to Jurain, and talk to her without interruptions, and she had the equipment, we would have just gone straight to find Kmat and killed it. But we would have been annihilated. Do you think we could have taken down that fire source straight out of Jurain? I'm thinking she intentionally set us down this hard path to make us stronger. Yeah, I can see the old bat doing that, for sure. And I see your overall point, too. We wouldn't be nearly this strong without everything we've done. But still, a fully armed escort wouldn't have hurt is all I'm saying.
They each looked down at their bruised and scarred bodies.
Agreed,
he said.
And maybe some better food along the way too, than what keeps good in a pack.
She kissed his cheek.
When this is all done, I want a huge banquet with all the best foods from everywhere.
Chesney practically drooled thinking about it.
And we should make stale dried crackers and hard cheese illegal.
They giggled at their little small talk and jokes up until they reached the temple. There were two symbols, a whirlwind for air, and a stylized ocean wave for water. Once they acquired the spirit, they'd each get 6 more spells, and be the strongest they would ever get. It hurt Chesney a little, just thinking about never being able to get earth and heart, but he put it out of his mind. Medea, he knew, would have been just as upset about never getting fire and heart. The smell of incense inside the temple was even more intense than usual, and their bodies reacted out of habit or perhaps instinct. Without prompting by the elders within, they quietly dropped their bags and took off their shoes, and sat before the Elder of Water.
Oh ho ho! You two do not look like regular resistance members. Come for training. Tell me, what has brought you here?
Chesney cleared his throat.
We are 2 spiritualists from Nasquat, here on a mission to stop Dahlgren and Neugren. Please, help us.
The elder's fat lips and saggy jowls turned contemplative.
Yes. I have heard the whisperings of your journey, little ones. Come, let us walk the path. Close your eyes. Breathe deep.
They did. Their bodies and minds felt full of something that couldn't be put into words. That familiar gravity that tugged at their souls. Their perception of time gradually slowing.
Water is a spirit of life. Every living thing needs water to live. It makes up most of our bodies. And it is everywhere in this world, even in the very air we breathe. It is fickle. It is soft, and easygoing, and timeless. And at other times, strong, and ruthless, and unpredictable. Tell me, between a drop of rain and a mountain, which is stronger?
Medea seemed to know instantly.
The drop of rain.
The elder sounded pleased.
Very good. Yes. A mountain may stand tall for thousands of years, but one day the rain would wash it all away. Its strength is formidable for those who are patient. Now, use your spirit. Reach out. What do you feel?
She felt inside herself, at the small parts of herself that seemed to be swaying to a rhythm she could not sense herself. Like Chesney, she had felt that strange incompleteness in relation to the spirits, like they should work together, but could not find the words. This time, instead of reaching for the familiar spirit of light, she instead shifted her attention to the sturdy, but elusive, spirit of earth. If what she had learned was true, earth was just as much her original spirit as light had been, yet she so rarely called upon it. Of all her spells but one involving earth, they were all more supportive, or curative. What would water and earth make together? The answer was maddeningly at the edge of her thoughts. All within herself, though everything felt sturdy, felt full.
I feel full, almost to bursting,
she said, straining.
Yes, that is water. Do not fight it. Open yourself to it. Let it in.
The air felt so thick. Each breath came harder and harder. Her heart skipped in fear. Should she let go and trust, even though she felt half drowned? There was a scratching in her thoughts, as though two microrats were clawing at two sides of the same door, despairing to meet. What do you want from me? From beside her, she could hear Chesney struggling as well.
No, that's... I can't. Stop.
She didn't know if it was wrong, or dangerous, but a part of her acted on instinct and reached over to take his hand. She needed Chesney to know, in that moment, she was there for him. This pain they shared together. And in a flash of insight, she understood what the spirit of water and earth desired together. Hold. Protect. A thin layer of water condensed over her hand, and over to Chesney. A near invisible shell formed around his body, and she knew it was as sturdy as any armor. And with that, the final piece came crashing into her. That feeling of filling herself. The truth of what water wanted, and needed. It wanted to fill in the cracks of her being, to make her strong, to protect her, and everyone she cared about. Let me in. And like a dam inside her broke, her last reservations fell away, and she was filled to the brim and more, and she finally could breathe once more, and know water for itself. She squeezed Chesney's hand, and took a deep breath that felt like she had been desperate for air for minutes. While she gasped and regained herself, she looked over to see Chesney, finding him pale and struggling. She didn't know why he was struggling, but it didn't matter. She knew he could do it.
Chesney, it's okay. You can do this. I know you can, whatever it wants. You two need each other. Let go, let go, let go. Please, please, please.
In shock, she did, and recoiled when he gripped his knees so hard there were broken threads over his pant. His breathing was deep and haggard, his eyes shut tight. She'd never seen him like this. It was like he was scared. The master spoke up.
Young man, remember, you're in control. Power is there to be used, or not used, as you see fit. It does not control you. Master it. Master yourself.
He nodded, and swallowed. His hands slowly came away from his knees, and he held them out from him in an odd, yet strangely familiar stance.
Tea together? We can. But when I say.
His breathing slowed and the tension in his muscles quieted. At last he opened his eyes, and looked at Medea. There was apology there in his look.
Are you okay? What happened?
She asked, worried to see him so shaken. The master stood.
Ah, I see you have had a trying time accepting water into yourself. Sit, and take things slowly. I shall bring tea, and we may talk.
When he left to make the tea, Medea scooched closer to Chesney and put a hand on his arm. His other hand reached over and touched her hand hesitatingly.
Sorry,
he began.
I really did appreciate you holding my hand there. Did I hurt you?
His head shook vigorously.
No. No, no, no. Nothing like that. I was scared that I would hurt you.
This was a surprise. Water was many things, but what she had felt, and what she felt now, it was still so serene and peaceful and protective.
Is it because of fire?
He nodded.
What is it? What do they do?
He couldn't quite answer, but he looked her in the eye, and forced his hand into an angry claw. When she understood, she gasped in shock, and jerked away without thinking. The hurt in his eyes was like a knife stabbed through her heart, and she cursed herself for overreacting.
No, wait, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I understand. No, it's not. I'm really sorry.
She hugged him, firmly, and asked,
Are you okay, though? You seem to really be struggling with it.
He shivered for a heartbeat, then nodded.
Yeah, it's okay now. When I finally understood what they wanted together, I panicked. The power to instantly kill someone? That's not something I have ever wanted. And when you grabbed my hand, it was like...
Medea covered her mouth. In a small voice she said,
Oh no. You were worried you would kill me.
He tilted his head back and forth.
Sorta. I was struggling with even taking the power. It felt wrong, yes, but another part felt like it was a betrayal of you. But then you grabbed my hand. It was like you were giving me permission, telling me it was okay, that I could handle it. So, I let it in. But I underestimated it.
The master returned, and set 3 cups before them.
Ah yes. Water is a force not to be underestimated. Any sailor knows how fickle and strong the ocean may be. The 2 of them were so strong together. The power filled my whole being, and I was scared that one slip would spill over and hurt you. Fire is not a spirit that is easy to say no to, and water is. It's just so full. But I took control.
He smiled at Medea.
I'm okay now.
Together, the 3 of them calmed down with tea, and explored the new magic at their disposal. The master explained the names as well, for each spell. Chesney's unique spell with water and fire was called Defeat. There was a chance to instantly kill a living creature with the touch of his hand. As for Medea, her unique spell was called Wall, and it formed a barrier that could absorb several blows before being shattered. Shared between them was Water's singular spell, Defense Up, the opposite of the defense-destroying spell which tore at the bonds of a physical body. Defense Up instead strengthened those bonds and filled in the gaps, substantially making the user more resilient. And the others were Break Group, Daze, Snowstorm, and Lighting Storm. The pair finished their cups, thanked and paid the master, then made their farewells. Outside, Medea asked,
Are you sure you're okay?
Chesney nodded and started stretching.
Oh yeah, it's all fine now. But, you know what we should do? No. What? Really? Come on, let's go wild and try it all out. Seriously? Here in this little valley? There's nothing to even fight. Well, there's each other. Come on, it's been ages. Don't you want to see how we've grown?
She crossed her arms, tilted her head, and thought. When had been the last time they sparred? Right before they left for Sayesquat, and that had just been without magic. Plus, it had ended on a bit of a sour note when she had a panic attack in the dark. Since then, they'd gotten 2 new spirits, and almost died a handful of times. She was sure she had told her slightly younger self what they would have had to do on this journey. She would have been terrified and perhaps given up. But after all these battles, she didn't feel scared or weak. She felt strong, stronger than ever. And now that they had the final spirit they would ever get, she was at the peak of her power. And she, too, burned to find her limits, and break past them. She cracked her neck.
Oh, you are so on, Buster.
The first explosion didn't register with the workers in the resistance base, busy as they were with their various tasks. Additionally, The southern cave exit wasn't guarded since the valley was inaccessible to all save through this cavey. When the wind started, it took a little while, but eventually it was noticed that the whistling torrent outside was only coming from one cave mouth. Some of the workers started to file outside to investigate. By the second explosion, though, almost everyone had heard the commotion and scrambled to find out what was going on. Haddock, the leader, was of course the last to know. He had looked up from his reports to an empty cave. He saw one woman running through the passages with an armful of snacks. He yelled after her.
"What in the world is going on? Private? It's those kids. Come and see,"
she said, and darted away. Curious, he followed, and barged through a tight-packed throng of his soldiers seemingly standing outside in a torrential rainstorm. He was about to shout at the fools to get back inside when a massive lightning bolt struck the cliff face near the far end of the valley, and he finally saw and understood. His jaw dropped, and the pencil he'd been chewing on dropped out of his mouth. The two child prodigies were having a sparring match. It was the scariest thing he had ever seen in his life. Between flashes of lightning and gouts of fire, their small forms flashed into view and disappeared just as quickly. Flurries of hand-to-hand blows he could hear from here. Gale-force winds pushing against each other, sending whirlwinds off in every direction that tore the ground. Waves of reality distortion flying in great RCS. The entire valley was their battlefield. He couldn't even consider approaching the maelstrom, let alone stopping it. Was this the kind of power Zagos wielded? No wonder none had ever succeeded in assassinating him. But these two. He finally understood the faith Daphne had put in them. Joyce, and Fiery, and all the others, too. These two had a strength to them he had never before seen. They could do it. They could stop him. And he would make sure they had the chance. He grabbed the nearest squad leader by the lapels.
"Get the others, and meet me inside, on the double,"
he shouted into the wind.
"What? What? Why?"
the man asked, moving his head back and forth between his commander and the ongoing sparring match, still desperate to watch.
"I want all the details of the plan finalized tonight, and ready to go in the morning. Now move, on the double."
The man nodded, and saluted.
"Yes, sir,"
and ran off to collect the others. This is going to be a long night, but great ones be damned, we might just have a chance. The next day, Chedsney and Medea awoke with sore bodies, but felt content to have really stretched themselves out and found out what they could do. It wasn't long before Haddock had them fetched to his war room. They were dressed quickly, and seated to either side of the resistance leader, while a half-score of squad leaders and others were scattered about the room.
"Thanks for coming, you two,"
Haddock began. He was a somewhat younger-looking Doru than Grunt, with really short brown hair and 2 scars up his cheek that seemed to end with a piece missing from his ear. He also looked very tired. His rough hand spread a map of eastern Say-Asquat out on the table.
"We've been working on a plan to get to Noah Grin to stop it, and with you two, we finally have all the pieces in place."
Chedsney furrowed a brow and looked over to Haddock.
"Wait, you were already planning to get at Noah Grin? Didn't you know you can't destroy it with regular weapons? There's more than one way to fillet a fish, kid. The whole thing can't be indestructible. It's got to be getting power from somewhere. Anyway, all that is moot now, because we've got you two."
Medea looked over the maps and documents laid before them with a keen eye, chin held in one hand contemplatively.
"All right, go on. As you've already suspected, Noah Grin is located in Zagos' seat of power, the Temple of Zagos. The defenses for this place are completely unassailable. The only option is covert entry. As it so happens, in celebration of Noah Grin's completion, he's... Wait.
Chedsney interrupted.
"It's done? Like, done?
Haddock nodded, and in response Chedsney cursed loudly, slammed his fists into the table, and then grabbed his hair in frustration.
Has he used it yet?" "I can answer that.
A Doru woman missing an ear and dressed all in black fatigues raised her hand.
The answer is no. He's wanting to make a big show of it for the celebration first. We've confirmed it. His plans start the next day, and the engagement will begin within a week from there.
Medea walked over to Chetsney and put a soothing hand on his back, then turned to ask,
Okay, so, we still have time, right?
Haddock nodded.
Yes. In fact, that celebration will be his downfall. Now, look here.
He pointed to a spot labeled somewhat to the west of the Zagos' temple. Chetsney let out a breath, nodded at Medea with a small smile, and turned a grim look at the map.
This is Roki, a town mostly inhabited by Shimrik.
Chetsney's mind sent off to another lifetime when he learned about the various races on Lennis.
Those are them. They're an aquatic race in Sasquatch, right? That's right. Real nasty customers in a fight, and completely loyal to Zagos. They provide a lot of food to feed Zagos' armies. Outside of all that, though, they're just regular folks. Anyway, the town has been tasked with organizing a parade to honor Zagos and Noigren. That's the key.
He traced his fingers from Roki to the temple.
If we can infiltrate the parade, we can sneak into the temple, slip away, find our way to Noigren, and destroy it.
Medea tilted her head in thought.
Well, don't you think he would really beef up security for the parade? That's where we come in.
Another squad leader chimed in, this one a beefy Rakgorn with dark blue scales. His voice was deep and sharp, like knapping stones.
In the hours before the parade, we, and resistance cells from all over Sasquatch, are planning to attack key locations all over the Empire. Zagos will have to respond, or lose things he can't afford to lose. So,
Chetsney said, never taking his eyes off the map.
This is the big one. No matter what, this is our one and only chance to get in before it all falls apart. And everything lies on us.
The room seemed to stand still, as everyone watched a boy wrestle with knowing the fate of the world rested entirely on him. He seemed to age a year, staring at that map, staring at the temple, staring into the past. There were so many things Medea wanted to do or say to ease that burden, but she stayed where she was, and stayed silent. She knew what he would say. Knew he didn't need her right then. She knew his true strength.
When does the parade start?
He asked.
It's slated to begin in approximately 8 hours.
A voice said. Chetsney took one final breath, and stood.
Then, before the sun sets, Noigren will be destroyed.
He withdrew Cormu's sword, and held it out for all to see. It felt so heavy in his hand, but he did not shake. Not here.
On my life, I swear.
Inside, his thoughts finished. I will not fall here. I still have work to do. Once all preparations were complete, and messengers went out, there was no going back. The clock had started. In hours, war would rage all over Sasquatch, and with every passing second, their one window of hope was closing. At the back of the KV system was a boat moored to a river under a covered covert. All left within the base stood on either side to make a path for them, hands on their chests in salute. Everyone knew this was it. Lives would be lost today, no matter the outcome. The fate of Lennis would be decided today. Chetsney and Medea stood tall, taking on their burdens like well-worn and familiar cloaks, determination etched on their faces. As they walked to the boat, Haddock stopped them, and gestured towards a few men standing off to the side with him.
We found some trusted mercenaries we've worked with before. They're willing to hire on with you on this mission, if you want them.
Chetsney looked them over critically. 2 of them were Rakgorn, and 1 a Doru.
All right, tell me about yourselves.
One of the Rakgorn, a bluish-gray scaled one with pale gold forehead plating, introduced himself in a clacking voice.
Name's J. Razab. Don't got no spirits, but we're sturdy and fight well. This here's my brother, G. He comes along, or neither of us go. 1,000 gold for us both.
Chetsney looked his brother over, and was unimpressed. In every way, He was thinner and less strong-looking than his presumably older brother. He even saw a stuffed animal sticking out of his backpack. Chesney turned to the Doru.
And you?
The Doru man looked like he only had one face, and that was deadly serious. His short dark hair had started to turn gray, though he hardly seemed aged at all. His body looked strong.
I am Chikan.
He held up both hands, showing a strange-looking shield, and a device Chesney had never seen before. It had Reagan writing on the side.
I have these artifacts I looted from a Reagan ruin, and can use them well. The shield is capable of reflecting attacks upon the attacker, and this thing, I call the Z-Eraser, can blast holes in just about anything I've ever seen. I also have the spirits of Earth, Heart, and Sphere.
Medea perked up.
Did you say Heart? What spells do you have unique to Heart? Peace, Crush, and another one I'm not going to use.
At her questioning glance, he sighed and said,
It's called self-defeat. You know how there's no such thing as healing magic? Well, this spell is the one exception. It kills, or nearly kills, the caster, and gives the life energy to their allies. Like I said, I won't be using it. Anyway, 2,000 gold. Take it or leave it.
Chesney dug around in his purse and handed Chikan his money.
Okay, let's go.
He turned to the two Rakgorn.
Sorry, I just don't want too big a group.
He left unsaid that he, though the younger Risov brother, looked utterly useless. With that, the trio climbed in the boat, and Haddock pushed them away from the dock. He stood and saluted, with his men, for as long as the children were in view. He tried very hard not to think about how he had just sent two children into the hands of the most dangerous tyrant the world had ever seen, on an impossible mission. Once they were out of sight, he turned to his soldiers.
All right, let's get to work, and make sure those kids get their chance. Move it!
The boat's pilot was a young Doru boy, probably around their own age. He sailed them out of the cave, into a wide river that was running north to south and flowing into the ocean. The sun had risen a few hours ago, but was still quite close to the horizon, illuminating a vast forest on the west side of the bank.
Okay, we've got a hidden dock on the other side. That's where I'm going to drop you off. If you skirt around the forest going north, you'll get around the worst of it, and then Roki is just east of there. How long will it take to walk to Roki?
Medea asked, while making sure her pack was evenly distributed.
About an hour and a half, maybe a bit more.
The river trip was uneventful, and in a short time the young boy had deposited them on the shore by a well-hidden small dock.
All right, I'll be back here waiting from sundown until sunrise to pick you up. Don't forget, if something happens and you have to back off, leave a note under that rock over there. We'll find it. Oh, and one last thing. Watch out, the creatures here are unbelievably nasty. Nastier than that fire sower in the snowfields?
Chesney asked. The boy shook his head.
Where do you think those things came from? This side of the river. Watch yourselves.
And with that he kicked the boat off the dock, and gave them a quick salute.
Bloody well, fantastic.
Chesney mumbled.
Chikan, can you keep everything away from us?
The older man nodded, and made some gestures in the air.
Should be good for the trip.
They set out, with the forest on one side and the slow river bubbling on the other. After a few minutes, Chesney noticed that Medea looked a bit distracted, and asked her what was wrong.
Oh, sorry,
she said, looking genuinely ashamed.
It's just, there's so much pressure. It's getting to me. I know it's really selfish of me to ask, but would it be okay if I, zoned out for a bit? I need to take my mind off things. That's fine. I think I'm on edge enough for the both of us,
he said, not entirely joking. He felt that pressure too, but rather than feel crushed by it, he felt driven, like he should be going faster, working harder. His senses were tuned up to a hair trigger, and his muscles just couldn't relax.
I'll keep a lookout.
She gave him a quick hug, and a kiss to his cheek, then pulled out a book he had never seen before out of her bag, along with a writing tool. Over the next half hour, she scribbled and erased things, humming intermittently and singing under her breath. Even with things as they were, Chesney's curiosity eventually got the better of him.
What are you doing, anyway?
It took a moment for her to realize she was being spoken to. At his second question, she said,
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you at first. I'll tell you, but you have to promise not to laugh.
She looked at him with something approaching, but not quite reaching, a glare.
If I do, may my shoes forever be untied. That's the least of what I'll do to your shoes. Anyway, you remember how Luliette was taking down everything we did and wanted to write about us?
He vaguely remembered Luliette scribbling like crazy while they had their sparring match outside Daphne's cave the last time, and nodded. She held the book protectively to her chest, and looked somewhat embarrassed.
Well, I don't even know how to say it really. But ever since me singing in the tent, and finding out about our heritage, it's made me realize that one day, one way or another, someone is going to write stories about us, even write songs about us. And I just
Chesney smiled, and finished.
Wanted to make your own?
Medea blushed and returned the smile.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way some random person is going to know what it was like for us. But we do. I do. Look at that whole musical play about the Sophie and Cormu and Gabnid. Who knows how much of that is true? How much people were reading into half-remembered stories and legends? Or was it made up entirely? When this is all over, for good or for ill, I want people to know, U.S., feel, U.S., and, our, words, no one else's. Understand we weren't gods, or legends, or whatever, but real people for fought and hurt and hoped. And? How is it going?
She groaned.
Awful. Hey, cut yourself some slack, Medea. You are, quite literally, trying to write a song while walking through a super dangerous forest. So, don't worry.
He leaned over and kissed her forehead.
You'll get it. I know you can do it.
At his kiss, she turned even more red than she had before.
Chesney, you can't just do that so suddenly. Why not? You kissed my cheek out of the blue earlier. That's different.
Chacon, clearing his throat diplomatically from behind them, said,
The world depends on a couple of love-struck teenagers, huh?
Like a shot, the two of them leapt apart, deeply embarrassed at forgetting they weren't alone. They walked on in silence for a while, and the breaking of tension had an effect on Chesney. When this is all over, what am I even going to do with my life? He'd spent the entire journey, eyes forward, locked on to what was right in front of him. He'd barely even taken time to cool down and relax. It was like his body and mind had forgotten how to. He looked over to Medea and marveled how she could set things aside, and think about the future like that. What could he do? What did he want to do? Was it selfish even trying to think of something like that when their greatest challenges still lay in front of them? His mind slouched in many directions. Becoming a spiritualist teacher, adventurer, mercenary, fisherman, retire somewhere quiet for a long time. Maybe? But the more he thought about it, the more one particular option seemed to bubble up to the forefront again and again. He missed his home. He missed his mother. Maybe it was impossible for things to ever go back to how they had been, but right now he wished to see her again dearly. Then, the thought of introducing Medea to her came to mind, and it was suddenly hard to concentrate. Okay, that's enough daydreaming. Time to focus. He shook his head, and returned to keeping an eye out. True to Chachakan's and the sailor's words, the journey to Roki was uneventful and over in a little over an hour and a half. For a town of the Shimrek, Roki wasn't actually altogether that close to the shore. It was big though, about as big as Conchudo had been, and it was just as busy too. Fiorla and Shimrick people were busy decorating the town, running goods to and fro from warehouses to shops, and shops to warehouses. There were regular people, as well as costumed people. Large, multi-leveled stands with decorations, just sitting unattended on the ground. In short, it was chaos. Most shocking of all to the children was just how alien the Shimrick looked in comparison to many of the other races of Lennis. The Saenal, the aquatic race of Nasquat, looked almost identical to Lafrey, save for having fins on their backs and faces. In contrast, the Shimrick looked almost beastly, save that they were humanoid in shape. That was where the similarities ended. Smooth, slippery blue skin, keen hunter's eyes, long and thin limbs, long webbed fingers and toes, with a very long tapering tail, and an elongated head that curved back to follow their spine. The only things that seemed to tie them to Sasquatch was that the head had a long forehead plate, just as almost every other race here in Sasquatch. As beastly and vicious as they looked, though, at least here in this town they looked completely at home, and as peaceful as any other people. Having donned their hoods and found a secluded place to watch, Medea surveyed the tumult critically.
If this is supposed to be the parade, I can't see it being too hard to sneak in. There is no organization at all. Agreed. But that also worries me. What do you mean? Doesn't it seem a little too disorganized? Will this all even be ready to go in time?
She looked over at the sun and roughly judged the time.
You're right. At this point, everything should be all ready to go, and just waiting for the scheduled time.
With crossed arms and restless legs, Chedsney oozed impatience and concern.
We can't afford for this to get delayed. If the resistance attacks those outposts before the parade even begins, they could cancel the whole thing. I'm open to suggestions.
Chekan shrugged.
Why don't we just skip the whole parade idea? With just the three of us, it can't be that hard to sneak into the temple. Steal some armor, or priest robes, and waltz in.
Chedsney leveled a questioning glance to Medea, who immediately shook her head.
No way. We can't throw away a plan like this without knowing all the details on why it was made this way in the first place. If the resistance was convinced this was the only way in, for now I'll believe them. So,
Chedsney continued,
where does that leave us? As loath as I am to do more favors for people we don't know, we need to find out what is keeping the parade from being ready and fix it. Fine in. Let's split up to ask around and meet up in an hour.
With a plan set, they all went their separate ways and did what they could to find out what the situation was. Medea considered trying to follow one of the rushing workers was bound to lead her down the path to finding out what the holdup was. So she found a girl running with bolt of shimmering fabric and followed her. Chedsney, on the other hand, had considered that almost everything he'd ever learned on this journey had come from talking to people in a tavern, so headed that way. Chekan patrolled the streets, eavesdropping where he could. When they returned, all three had news, and Chedsney came back with another girl in tow, who looked a little bit older than them. Hidden away in an alley, away from the tumult going on in the streets, they reconvened. Medea leveled a cool glare at Chedsney.
Well, who is your friend?
Chedsney coughed and scratched at the back of his head, withering at the glare. As calm as she looked on the outside, he could just feel the disapproval simmering under the surface.
Well, this is Lily.
The girl was a Fiorla, a few inches taller than Medea, and about the same height as Chedsney. She had a bright green forehead plate with distinct dark green ridges, and some short-cut red hair underneath. She smiled with a wink, and introduced herself with a very bubbly voice.
Hey there, I'm Lily. If you guys let me join in on whatever it is you're doing, I promise I will rock your socks off.
Medea's face turned completely to the picture of polite joy and reached over and shook Lily's hand, before returning to her barely concealed scowl when looking at Chedsney.
Yes, please, do explain.
He instantly put up his hands defensively, almost like he was scared she was going to hit him with something.
Well, hold on now. She didn't say that she's actually a really strong spiritualist. She heard me asking around about the parade and promised that whatever I was up to, she would help, provided we could get her some equipment.
Lily nodded along enthusiastically.
Yep. Always wanted to be a mercenary, but all the equipment in this town is so darn expensive. So, if I can help, I totally will, provided you can buy me some equipment.
Media changed her face to be as diplomatic as possible.
Lily, please, don't take this the wrong way, but, do you have any idea what we're actually doing here? Nope,
she said, cheery.
Kate's over here said he'd explain later.
Chesney sighed, and explained.
No, I said I wasn't sure if we needed you yet, but we would all talk about it.
He turned to Medea and Chakan.
Basically, I had her tag along just in case whatever you two found out could use some extra manpower. We are short on time. I see. Chesney, can I talk to you for a second?
Medea asked, and he nodded and followed her to an even more secluded spot.
Chesney, what were you thinking? Letting her tag along? She's barely older than us, and have you considered what you're basically going to be asking her to do could get her killed?
Chesney nodded, and his demeanor changed back into the cold, calculating look he'd worn ever since they left the resistance base.
I know, and I'm with you on this, but once she started poking her nose in what I was doing, I knew I couldn't let her out of my sight. For now, as long as she's with us. She's not off telling tales about us. Well, at least you have some sense.
Her expression softened just a hair.
I didn't want to say this in front of her, but our activities in Sasquatch have not gone unnoticed. This whole town is swimming in rumors about the resistance being silenced for good, and that there's a group of Nasquat terrorists here in Sasquatch. I don't think I have to tell you that means us. We can't let her know too much. And this isn't just for our sake, Chesney, but hers too. Think of how much danger you're putting her in here.
He pinched the bridge of his nose, and sounded very tired.
I know. I got careless, and got her involved without meaning to. It's my responsibility. As soon as we can, before the actual raid, we'll find a way to ditch her, once we know that she can't interfere with our plans.
Medea sighed, long and weary, before putting on a more professional expression and posture, and crossed her arms.
Fine, let's just get on with it.
They walked back to the group, where Lily was peppering Chakan with question after question he was giving non-committal answers to. Medea raised her voice and brought the meeting to order.
All right, let's talk about what we've learned. I'll go first. I spoke to a number of the tradespeople and performers involved and found some information. Right now, the dressmakers are all on overdrive because the person organizing the parade, the mayor, is a bit scatterbrained and didn't get them ordered in time. Also, fun fact, the song they're playing is actually a tune from Nasquat, and the mayor has no idea. So, that's 3 strikes against this mayor, in my book. Wait, 3? What was the 3rd one?
Her face screwed up into a sneer.
Apparently the dresses are really skimpy. Bit of a skirt fiend, as far as I can tell.
Lily chimed in, sharing in Medea's mood.
Oh yeah, the guy's a total perv.
Chesney, not wanting to draw attention to his own blush at the idea they might very well be wearing these costumes, quickly changed his subject and turned to their hired mercenary.
Okay, how about you, Chakan?
The older man cleared his throat.
Well, just a few things. Mostly, I learned that the mayor has been quietly asking some people to help him with some task, but hasn't had any luck, and that's what's been keeping him from focusing on the rest of the preparations. As for what it is, I have no idea. Nobody seemed to know.
Nodding, Chesney finished.
All right, well, the one thing I learned is that only townsfolk are allowed to enter this parade. So, it's going to be a little harder joining it than we'd originally anticipated. Yep.
Lila chimed in, rolling back and forth on her heels.
Townies only. A reward for providing so much food to the Empire. We catch a lot of fish, and sell it to the army wholesale. So, basically,
Medea said, in full analysis mode and looking off into space while she talked.
The parade is behind schedule because something is bothering the mayor. And, Chances are, whatever that is, it's what's really holding everything back. Sounds about the size of it. Sounds like we need to pay him a visit. Oh, I can take us there,
Lily said, waving her hands enthusiastically.
and if he gets handsy, I can give him a zap, too.
At this, Medea smirked and snuffed a laugh.
I like how you're completely prepared for that. All right, let's go and see this guy.
Lily led them to a rather large and ostentatiously decorated building at the back of town. While still in the awful odd egg shape that seemed to be the required style in Sasquatch, it was obvious that a lot of money must have passed through this town. It was 2 stories tall, 2 egg shapes stacked on top of one another until it looked like a fat, bulbous cactus sticking out of the ground, painted with wild designs all along the base of each floor. Lily opened the door and waved absently to 2 female receptionists who were talking together in hushed tones.
Hey ladies, don't mind us.
They started to protest, but upon seeing Lily, immediately lost interest and went back to their conversation. Well, she certainly is saving us time, regardless of anything else, Chesney thought, which made it all the more difficult to get rid of her if they really needed to. The upstairs was a lavishly furnished huge open room. Leather couches, glass-top tables, crystal glasses, and a wall of liquors in so many kinds that Chesney did a double take. Growing up where he did, there were 2 kinds of alcohol, ale and wine. How many different kinds of alcohol do people really need? Shaking himself out of the distraction, he saw a fat old Fiorella man with a long pale white beard, and not a lot on top. His forehead plate looked a bit overwaxed, but no amount of polishing could hide the dullness that time had done to it. As opulent as the room and the man was, he still had an air of deflation and weakness to him, like he had recently become sick. He seemed so preoccupied with his thoughts that he hadn't even noticed them.
Hello, lend us to Mr. Mayor,
Lily said, bending over and waving her hands in the old man's face. At the man jumped in his seat a little.
Well, oh, Lily, you scared this old man half to death, you little rascal. What in the world? Oh, guests. Sorry, so sorry.
At seeing the assemblage, he shot up and started moving things around his desk and motioning at chairs and babbling about drink. Putting up her hands in an assuring manner, Medea smiled and spoke for the group.
Hello, sir. No, there's no need for any of that. We had just heard about the parade and came here to see it, but it sounded like there was some kind of problem.
The old mayor took in a great breath, sat down, and let it all out slowly like a deflating balloon.
Oh, problems. Yes. Of course I told him. I really did. But how do you say no to him? You can't. And every day I'm racking my brain trying to find an answer. And the day of the parade gets closer and closer, and still, nothing.
There was a real look of fear in the man's eyes, and his hands were trembling while he poured himself a rather strong drink. Chesney and Medea shared a quick glance. It wasn't hard to guess who he was talking about. Medea started again, with a calm tone.
Sir, who do you mean? And what's the problem?
The man took a long drink, filling some down his cheeks, and when he was done, was so shaken that he didn't quite get the glass on the table and it tipped over and shattered. He hardly seemed to notice, and held his face in his hands.
Who? It's Lord Zagos, of course. He comes himself, in person, and tells me to organize a parade. Only, it has to have the spirit of Riga at the head. The blasted spirit of Riga.
Carefully, Medea knelt down and picked up the largest pieces of shattered glass, while she spoke.
What's that? Oh, I don't know. Some old thingamajig or what's it? But it's in those old ruins outside of town, and anyone who goes there gets attacked by some huge, awful creature.
Quietly, Chesney groaned to himself. Here we go. Another great one's damned errand. Medea angrily flicked his leg before standing and gently setting the glass she's picked up in a nearby trash can.
So, if you are able to get this spirit of Riga, everything is fine to go forward?
The old man gestured dismissively with hands limp as noodles.
Well, sure, but I've asked damn near everyone in town, and there's no mercenaries about at all. And ARandomAudiobookAppeared.
His speech had gone a little slurry, and he narrowed his eyes at all of them and seemed to be looking at them properly for the first time.
Now, hold on a minute. You're all spiritualists, aren't you? Yup,
Lily said, giving a cheery thumbs up. The effect on the man was immediate. He jumped out of his chair, stumbling so bad that if he hadn't been braced by Chikan at the last moment he'd have fallen down.
Oh, great ones be praised. I'm saved.
He next bounced away, and fell to his knees in front of Medea and grabbing at her skirt.
Oh, please. Please, I beg you. Go and get it for me. I'll do anything. I'll pay anything. Only please do it.
Medea, her face twisting into disgust, was tugging her skirt out of his hands, when Lily yelled,
No! Bad mayor!
And zapped a chunk out of the wall near his head with a bolt spell. Cowed, he put up his hands and started to grovel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Only please, you must help me. I'm begging. Oh, honorable spiritualists, wise as great Gabnid.
Tired of all this in the worst way, Chesney rubbed his face with one hand while gesturing placatingly with his other hand. He raised his voice probably a bit louder than was necessary.
All right, we'll do it. Stop whining.
Not really wanting to see the old man beg anymore, he turned around and waved everyone to follow.
All right, Liliette, let's get you some equipment.
Obviously there was no weapons or armor for Chesney at the shop, but he was able to pick up a cheap shield to replace the one that had been melted by the fire soar. But there was some better armor for Medea there, which was a nice change. At this point her armor basically looked like it had been used as a Terror Rex's chew toy, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth. She practically burst a blood vessel, though, when she saw how much Lily was piling on the counter. Chesney had to agree. The cost of a full set of armor and weapons was beyond extravagant, the cost possibly exceeding all the money they'd spent on this journey put together. Unfortunately, there was literally nothing cheaper. Before they paid the frankly massive bill, Medea dragged Chesney to a corner of the shop to have a very harshly whispered conversation.
Are you seriously planning to pay for all of that? That's 2/3 of our money. What are we supposed to do? Are you actually willing to risk going to this ruin without more backup? Chesney, it's basically robbery.
He nodded, sharing deeply that feeling of being practically scammed by this teenager. But time was not on their side.
I know. I get that. But it's not just about us. 1, we are on a time limit. And 2, what? Honestly, do we need all this money for, if not to save us time or resources when we really need it?
Her hands were clenched into shaking fists, and her lips started a half-dozen words without actually making a sound.
Medea, if you think we can do it without her, for sure, 100%, I'll go tell her to shove off.
She jabbed a finger in his chest.
That's not fair. This was a mess. You started, and you don't get to dump the decision on me.
He cringed inwardly. She had a point. Several. For this much money, he could easily buy a house. But with more fire sores roaming around, and Immortals knows what was waiting for them in those ruins, and a very strict timeline that was ticking down every moment, what choice did he have? But this wasn't just about him. This was about Lily too. He looked away.
You're right. I'm sorry. I'll take care of it.
He left Medea, told the shopkeeper to hold on for just a moment, and dragged Lily outside alone, down narrow alleyways to the most secluded spot he could find. He stood tall, looked at her with all the impassiveness of a merchant shopping for Gubo, and said,
Okay, Liliette, consider this your interview. Impress me.
If she was at all insulted that a child 3 years younger than her was treating her like this, she didn't show it.
Well, I'm not exactly new to fighting. This is Sasquatch after all. I was born with the spirit of fire, and I traveled around when I was about 10 with my parents and received the spirits of air and light as well.
Chesney did the quick math in his head on what spells she would have. Fire, fire all, escape, bolt, bolt all, and blow up. She had a huge variety of single and wide area attack, but curiously none of the middle-of-the-road options. In all aspects, it seemed, this girl was all or nothing.
All right. And what do you know about being a mercenary? Well,
she started, looking up and resting her chin on a finger.
My dad was one, and talked about it a lot. You hire on, fight for your employer until either side decides to leave, and move on at the next town. And did he mention what it was like to be hired to do things he didn't want to do?
She got a little less bubbly at that question, and seemed to shrink back just a little.
Well, yes, he did, sometimes, when he drank a lot, and forgot what he was saying. Are you prepared for that? To do something you never wanted to do, for money? Well, I didn't really expect this job to be something like that. What's wrong with exploring some ruins? Okay, Liliette, I'm going to be honest. I think you should give up on this. It was fun hanging with you, but I don't know if you're cut out for this kind of thing.
She stamped her foot and her eyes blazed to life.
No way. This is what I've wanted to do my whole life. I'm good at fighting. Really, I am. I even thought about enlisting, but Daddy said that it was awful in the military. So, this is my big chance to finally make something of myself. I promise, I will not let you down.
This wasn't working. He had to change tactic. What he was about to do was stupid. He knew. But there was no way it wouldn't come up at some point. He pulled back his hood, and showed her who he truly was. She gasped in shock, stepping back.
But that would mean you're from Nasquat.
Another few seconds later, she took a sharp intake of breath, and mouthed, "The terrorists." All the vibrancy of her leached away, and he could practically see the gears turning in her mind with every subtle movement of her hands and glance of her eye. Eventually, she wrapped her arms around herself and looked away.
Well, I guess I understand why Midia seemed so angry I showed up. I never thought. Why are you even showing me this? Honestly, because I need to know what to do with you. I tried to get rid of you, but you wouldn't take the hint, and I couldn't risk you putting together who we were on your own. So, now, we're stuck.
Her expression turned pained, and shifted like she was having an argument with herself. Eventually, she bit her lip, and met his eyes.
Are you really going to fight Zagos?
He sighed.
I never wanted to. I only came to Sasquatch to get Cormu's things. But then, he built Noigrin, and now I don't have a choice. It absolutely has to be destroyed.
Her eyes scrunched together, and looked wet at the corners. In a bare whisper, she said,
Why couldn't you just have been awful?
She didn't wait for him to respond, but started talking, in a much lower, somber voice.
We're not blind to it all, you know. Not all of us. Anyway, all of this.
She gestured vaguely at everything.
Mom was a researcher, working wherever they sent her, seeing her less and less. Then, one day, she just never came back. When Daddy begged at the temple to find out what had happened, it didn't go well. Not long after, they came for him. Said the army needed him. Never mind that he was so old and worn from being a mercenary to fight. I've been so alone for over a year. Everyone is so nice, helping to look after me, but...
Her voice cracked with emotion.
I hate him so much,
she said, through gritted teeth, and hands balled into fists, and suddenly the air was filled with heat.
I know they wanted me to be safe, did everything they could to keep me safe, but... He took away the world that Mommy always used to tell me about at bedtime. How things were before. It was hard, but it wasn't like this. People weren't rounded up and sent away. People weren't killed for saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. Nobody was forced to fight. Nobody was forced to lose their...
It was too much, and she couldn't say the last part. She swallowed, and turned to Chesney resolutely.
I wanted to become a mercenary so I could get strong, so I could find a way to get my revenge.
He took a long, deep breath.
I believe you, Liliette. I really do. But, are you really ready for this?
He took the sword of Cormu out of his scabbard.
You really might die.
She looked at the sword, and even as dour as the mood had turned, she still looked at it in awe.
Is that really?
He nodded. Her voice sounded so fragile when she asked,
Do you really think you can do it? I know I can. I have to.
He lied. It was feeling less and less like a lie every time he said it, though.
Then, please? Take me with you? I'm begging you.
He looked her hard in the eyes. Funny how easy it had become, when at the start it felt so hard, and how awfully familiar those eyes looked, even being in someone else's head. As much as they had needed the help, he had never felt like taking Wild along had been fair. She could fight, but hadn't been prepared for the emotional toll of fighting for her life every day. And now someone even younger was begging to be taken into the jaws of death, and he was considering making the same mistake twice. Nobody was really prepared to risk their life like that. Not really. But one thing he could not ignore, could never ignore, was that look in her eyes. That desperate, hateful need for revenge. Eyes that needed something, anything, to give them purpose. It was wrong. It was unhealthy. It would only end in disaster, or death. But to deny her would make him the world's biggest hypocrite.
All right,
he said, already walking back to the shop.
Let's get you suited up.
End of chapter.